Alan, we're sitting here in the place where you write. Is this where you do all of your writing?
Yes, I do all my work here, and I do, for some reason, need to have a den where things happen. If I go away and write on residencies, I tend not to get anything done, and there's some inhibition that stops me working effectively in other places. I don't quite know why, but I do need to, terribly womb-like, I suppose, but I'll accept that.
So do you have certain rituals as well, or certain times of the day that you write?
It's varied over my writing life. I used to say all the mornings were always devoted to writing, and I would sit down at about 9 and finish at about sometime after 12. I remember I wrote my first novel between 6 o'clock in the morning and when I had to go off relief teaching at 8:30. And I found those early mornings particularly apt for a novel that was about life at sea and getting up and doing your 4 hours on, 4 hours off watches in sort of dark and rough conditions. These days I find, and this might be the degeneration of my muse, that if I take a glass of wine or whiskey to the screen at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that's actually when I'm doing my most effective work. And too often I'm sitting here in the other hours of the day just looking out of the window. There's a particularly lovely Danish lady who hangs her washing out, and I can't keep my eyes off her when she's there.
Thinking time, maybe.
Thinking time, yes. Yeah.
Now, your poem that's included in The Invisible Thread is Roof Tilers, which is a really lovely poem that where you convey this kind of admiration for these tilers, these tradesmen doing their work. And it seems to me that as they carry out this work, it's almost like a dance. There's this real grace, as well as, physical prowess and this kind of good cheer. Tell us about what the poem means to you and what inspired it.
Well, you're right to pick the choreography of it. We were having an extension done in the house we lived in O'Connor, and the skeleton of it sits there with its sort of blonde pine trusses, and they were on their shoulders taking the tiles up, and the sheer adroitness, the sheer litheness of the bodies was just something that I, who was sitting in a studio just opposite watching them, just was taken by. I've always loved heights. I've fallen off roofs a couple of times, and I've climbed trees all my life, except recently. I just like the slight precarious danger of it. And so part of the feeling I had towards these fellows was envious. I'd rather like to be doing it myself. But the other part of it was just the way in which the whole physique is melded to the occupation. The way instinctively, when they have to lower themselves down, they lower themselves down about an axis rather than bend over and do things that would put them out of balance. So I love physical actions like that, and I've often written about dances and about work of that kind and other things about it. I was looking for a way of capturing speech that had a greater vernacular content than the poems I had previously done, and so this poem is part of a group of poems about occupations, essentially. I've done electricians, and there was a mechanic in it, and I think a couple of others. So the poem came together in that kind of way, yes, and our roof got built. So,
Well, I mean, you've captured it beautifully. It's an incredibly alive poem. You really feel like you're there in the moment with them. And tell us about you touched on the trades. What's your particular interest in that area?
I like manual work. I did builder's labouring during student holidays when I was at the ANU, and there sometimes we were asked to do quite precarious things, like go up a plank onto scaffolding with a full wheelbarrow of cement and, drop that and you'd know about it. climbing and erecting scaffold, that was always fun. But all those other things that are associated with the building trade were enjoyable. You know, even sweeping out a room, which was the most common occupation. You could yarn and so on. So I do like manual work as a relief to sitting at a screen trying to think of verbal things the whole time. It seems to give the mind a respite that recharges it. So that was a part of it, and having an extension done at the time helped. You meet some wonderful characters. I remember there was a bricklayer called Tom Hughes. He was over 70 at the time, a huge man, Welshman with a wonderful Welsh accent. And I went out on the first morning he arrived and offered him a cup of coffee. And some people would simply say, yes, thanks. But he said, Alan, you have fired an arrow and hit me in the very heart of my sentiments. And so I brought him his coffee and some chocolate digestive biscuits, and out of that, he later in his job rendered inside and out the workshop that he'd built for us for free. I said, Tom, I must pay you. And he said, Alan, I will not think of it. Think of it as payment for those chocolate digestive biscuits. So that was, so I mean, I like the vividness of it, you know. I suppose the likes of Shakespeare were sort of going and looking at building sites and getting similar kind of material.
Yeah, well, I mean, that vividness certainly comes through. Did you write the poem very quickly, or did it take a while? What was the process?
No, all my poems are accretive. I put down in notebooks or on the screen the bits that present themselves. I then rewrite them endlessly in the effort to try and get a momentum of writing going. I've got a theory that the imagination charges the hand, and the hand in turn charges the imagination. That the hand moving across the page is firing the imagination at the same time as the imagination is firing the hand that's moving across the page. There's a kind of reciprocity in that. But a poem would, by and large, take me a couple of weeks to gel. It's got to be seismically stable before it can be sent off anywhere.
Do you come back to it later, or do you finish it at the end of
I'm an inveterate reviser, so I think the original version of this poem in the book that it appeared in is probably slightly different. I think this one actually got fairly stable fairly quickly, but I will keep revising, reasonably confident that I'm not messing them up, that I am actually improving them. Something that Craig Cormick has once said, which I was quite taken by, he said, I'm not an especially good writer, but I'm a very good rewriter. And I think that a lot of the substance of the writing task is the business of reconsideration, because that is what both finesses a piece of art and tempers it.
You touched on, though, that point, there's a fine line of knowing when to stop, when you're making it better or when you're actually just tinkering and, you know, not improving the piece.
I do know sometimes I have taken a piece, started revising it, and then see that even though I don't like the original anymore, I like what has come out worse. But of course no one ever sees that because that just gets abandoned. It is where I have a sense that I have infused a greater vibrancy, a greater truth, and a greater fairness. And those are the three watchwords that I have, the three axes, I suppose, that I have in what I try to make. Vibrancy in this, as you say, the vitality of life in it. Truth, that I'm not saying something which is simply untrue, false, inaccurate, incorrect. But the most important one for me is the fairness, which is to say it is providing a fair take on the topic it's chosen in terms of of its place in the whole of life. And that for me is what the writing art is about, essentially. I won't say I've always succeeded in doing that, but that's what is always in my mind in terms of how I want a thing to finish.
You've been in Canberra for a very long time, over 40 years, I think.
I came in 1966.
So I'm interested to know about your time in Canberra as a writer. You were part of a very vibrant group of poets, for example, in the 1970s and 80s. Can you tell us about that time a little bit?
We were very lucky. I'd been engaged in politics, and I'd become disaffected by all the vitriol, essentially. We were always going out and shouting at people and telling them how much we disliked them, the police and the politicians and so on causes that were absolutely, had to be engaged with, Vietnam, conscription and others. But I wanted a break from that, so I joined the ANU Poetry Society, and they were mainly a performing society and would put on evenings of war music, of war poetry, evenings of love poetry, and then a campus reading once. And in that campus reading we discovered that there were some practitioners. And out of this came the idea we would put a little anthology together. Don't go looking for it, it's a dreadful piece of work. But it did start us off. We got front covers done by Arthur Boyd, who was a resident at ANU at the time, and it sold its 1,000 copies. And out of the money from that, we founded a magazine, which went for about 5 or 6 years, and where a greater number of poets congregated around. For example, Sarah Dowse was publishing some of her first work in this journal, along with others. And the poets who emerged at that time, David Brooks, Kevin Hart, myself, Philip Mead, Mark O'Connor, others.
Jeff Page?
Jeff had already really established himself. He had already had a book out, but he came into our congresses. We would put on readings and we would invite the elder poets of the district to come. And they had been starved of opportunities to be poets in public situations. But Rosemary Dobson, Alec Hope, David Campbell, Bob Brissenden, all would feature at our readings. Then Judith Wright came down to live down here, and she would become a part of it. Any poet going through town we would grab and put on, and they were all enormously supportive of our own work. And so there was a wonderful community of people, and hospitality got exchanged, and we'd meet around the campus, and that sense of community, it grew into an annual poets, what was it called, Poets Lunch, out at the Staff Centre, which Jim Murphy used to run. Really was a rather marvellous place to be, because in other parts of the country, poets were quarrelling with each other fiercely, and we just found we weren't. We liked each other. Other poets who joined it, John Rowland, came back from overseas and was a part of that group. So yes, it was that sense of community that was
It must have been an incredible time.
It was very enjoyable. We took it for granted. I suppose it came to an end with the death of David Campbell prematurely in 1979. He died of cancer. And we really had a great sense of loss because he was such a presence. But yes, the sheer tact and intelligence and kindness of the likes of Alec Hope in being I'm not going to use the word mentor, being a colleague, because that's what he genuinely was. But he would launch books for us. He would write reviews of our journals in Warone. Yeah, there was a lot of goodwill.
And you've lived, before coming to Canberra, in Europe, in Iceland, in Singapore. You were born in England, so you've lived in various different parts of the world, but you've been in Canberra for a very long time now.
Yeah.
And Canberra, as we know, is the place that Australians love to hate. So what is it that you love about it as a writer, being here?
Well, it is love-hate. I'll admit that immediately. I think the Burley Griffin idea of combining the bush with the amenities of the metropolis is inspired. Arcadia and Athens in the one concept. But of course, it's always imperilled by what people do with that. And for example, high-rise buildings, cutting out those wonderful hills are anathema to me. Yes, essentially I like a place where I can look out of the window and it's mostly green. That's a part of it. I am by nature an anti-metropolitan place, so a person. So I find when I visit Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, I just feel oppressed. Whereas I tend not to in Canberra. I tend not to in Adelaide either, I have to say, or indeed the very little that I know of Hobart. Both are slender, one is already high. You watch as he steps on his wire legs from batten to batten, pauses, steps, like a grazing antelope. And you feel somehow they own the morning, which is poised and still. Your house to be a row of blonde isosceles triangles on its immense blue page. Fut-fut, and small puffs of smoke jump from his air hammer. Nails clinch home in a spasm. Then, when suddenly he monkey scales the 50 mil edge of a truss, you mutter involuntarily, "But he'll fall," realising obscurely your concern is a middle-class disclosure. "Nah, believes he's an angel," replies his offsider, hefting a dozen tiles to his shoulder, steadying them, then climbing a flimsy gangplank. "Don't you?" he flings back, ascending, erect as a sapling, or folding around the axis of his body. You watch exhilarated at how technique folds away into physique, how the brain's gyroscope is the angel obeyed here, indeed by all who work at angles to the world. Not that gravity is auspicious, as, with oaths and swagger, they handle aloft their tile stacks, which are the same terracotta colour as their shoulders. Clippers, claw hammers swing from their belts like auxiliary limbs, and the subtext of their banter, which you're meant to overhear, is, "To fix you your roofline, customer, we will dance on air carelessly. Up there, our view of humans, which I guess just might include yourself, is that we are the species can walk on any theory strung across an empty space. So come on up." And you would, naturally, were it not that, what? Somewhere in your life, you mislaid your angel.